Right. Okay, good morning. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Dara Horgan. I work for Wind Energy Ireland and the T-Shore project. Here with my colleague Patrick Cantwell from Wind Energy Ireland and the T-Shore partner Nuala Carr from ATU, and our speaker today, Alan Duncan from Scotia Supply Chain. So just going to give it 2 more minutes just to let a few more people join. There was a nice number registered, so we'll just let a few more people. Give it 2 more minutes and then we'll start kicking off. And the session will be recorded and shared with the presentation slides after. Okay, so a few people have joined there now, so we're going to kick off. So as I was saying, the slides and the recording will be shared after the webinar. So we'll kick off. So thank you all for joining. My name is Dara Horgan. Today we are hosting a offshore skills webinar on behalf of the Irish T-Shore CoVE, which is part of the wider T-Shore project. So what is T-Shore? Just a quick run through. T-Shore is a Erasmus Plus CoVE funded project. We've been working together for the last 3.5 years. The project is finalising in June 26. We have established 6 regional centres of vocational excellence, addressing regional needs with European solutions for offshore skills. We've developed harmonised catalogue of wind turbine technician modules, and we've implemented a train-the-trainer exchange where vocational educationers were able to travel across borders, get know-how and expertise and best practice to share back to their regions. Overall, we have our website tshore.eu. This is a great resource to see what we've done, get access to our online platform. You can see the different events that we have coming up and we've hosted as well. You can see the education modules that we have developed, and we've also established a community of practice. So this is hosted on the Circle platform. You can use the QR code there on the screen to join. This has been just established in the last month, so it's at early stage. The view and the aim and objective for this is for the different regional CoVEs, its members and regional players to have a platform, a space to share knowledge, share best practices, different events and things like that coming up. So we would encourage you all to join that. But for today, we will be listening to Alan Duncan, who's going to give his experience and know-how from the kind of Scottish industry. So kind of part of the T-Shore objectives is sharing knowledge and kind of learning off different regions across Europe. So I will stop sharing my screen and pass over to Alan. And to say, there's a Q&A section up in the top of the Teams. If you could have all your questions in there, and we'll have a Q&A section at the end. Over to you, Alan.
Excellent. So just you can give me a quick thumbs up that
if you want to go full screen.
Slides are coming through.
That's full screen. Perfect.
Excellent. Good. So, morning everyone. Thanks for me allowing this platform. As you'll hear, bit of a thick Scottish accent. I've got a lot to cover. I maybe will get a little bit broad So apologies in advance for that. There must be some kind of AI Google Translate you can switch on if I start getting too much. But one thing I will say, there's a lot of information here. Some of this stuff I will maybe glide over, on the premise that, you'll get the slide deck. I wanted to have more in there so that you can reflect on it, look at it. So yeah, some of the stuff based on time, I may flick over. So listen, really what I'll run through today is lessons from the UK and more specifically Scotland. But Scotland, UK is in this kind of weird, for Europeans looking at it. UK surely is Scotland, but there's a lot of devolved powers in Scotland. So again, I'll kind of pick apart the kind of UK approach and the Scotland approach. It will make sense as I go through it. So coverage today. We've got about 55 minutes until the end. So my intention is 40 minutes slide presentation, leaving 15-minute Q&A. As Dara had said there, rather than sort of field any questions or hands up as I go, I'll kind of ask you to drop any questions into the chat, and the folks will pick them up for the Q&A part, and I'll swing back and cover them. So if that's okay with everyone, that means we can get through on time. So I think lessons learned 20 years on, embedding Scottish skills to meet the needs of the offshore wind industry. So really what I'll cover today is I'll give you a little bit of offshore wind market context. Again, a lot of you will know this, but those that you don't, I just, rather than just jumping into skills, where skills is where it is kind of relates to the context of the market. So I'll just talk a little bit about the UK market. The second thing I'll cover is kind of what I'm calling state leasing methods for ensuring a skills agenda and how it's embedded. So again, the UK is going through a bit of a journey there, and I'll show you how that has kind of impacted on, or what the UK government, if you like, has required of developers, required of industry, and how that kind of results in the skills agenda moving up the priorities. I'll touch on a little bit about how developers in the UK have responded. I've kind of gone after skills, some examples of focus initiatives I've done. And I'll finish off with, essentially what skills providers have done to meet this evolving need. So again, a summary there, I guess, as I would go, that, one thing we've learned is that developing Indigenous skills required to meet the needs of the sector cannot be done on a single project or via any one developer. It really requires a centralised industry body, taking the responsibility for having a collaborative approach. It does take time, it does take planning. There needs to be a realisation. Actions today are required to provide the pipeline of people tomorrow. It's not an instant tap you can turn on skills. There is a lead time, and it needs to be carefully thought through. Today, rather than look at how what I'd call traditional universities are producing sort of managers, engineers required, I'll concentrate on how technical colleges in the UK and local ports have focused on producing a pipeline of skilled technicians, wind farm operators that are fit for purpose. So just to explain a little bit who I am, very, very briefly, 16 years in supply chain across various industries, 14 years in offshore wind. So I started making blades with a company called LM Wind Power back in 2011, who are part of the GE group now. In 2013, I worked for a consultancy called BVG Associates. Some of you may have seen their reports that are out there. 2017, I established Scotia, which is my own consultancy. And really, I work across the gambit, work developers, so kind of specialising in supply chain. So there's some of my clients I've had in the past. Work for tier ones and OEMs, Mitsui Oceans, JMU, Haskinen. So, kind of into the tier one space, thinking about supply chain development. I also kind of work with enablers, so SOEC, Scottish Enterprise. Done a lot of work for Enterprise Ireland for about 8 years now. Oceantic over in the States. And I also partner with other consultancies doing work, again, specialising on the supply chain development part. And those of you that are active on LinkedIn, I do have a kind of offshoot company which has been launched this year, Heavy Lifting. Not going into that today, but please do check it out. So, as I promised, I'll look at the sort of market context in the UK, and I think I'll turn it, we do have some offshore wind, I would say, is going through a bit of a trough at the moment. If you've been around it as long as I have, you have peaks and troughs. We're definitely in a bit of a trough at the moment. So there are some short-term economic challenges. But I think the long-term future of offshore wind is absolutely secure. So that's a bit of a view, my view on kind of 2030, what the deployment will look like. I think it's going to be challenging for for Europe to kind of get to 130 plus gigawatts. But this was a view maybe about a year ago. And again, I don't intend to go through each country, but you can see there, the UK at the bottom, the red is definitely going to be the biggest country. But you can see a lot of countries coming online, Ireland in there with the green part, and some of the other traditional deployers. So, grid connection, economic viability, severe price increases. There is a strain on the sector at the moment. There's no doubt about it. But this is a view of the kind of supply chain in Europe. You'll see it is building up everywhere, across every country and across every sub-element. So, we'll have a burgeoning supply chain. We do have severe capex competition from low-cost countries, for things like monopiles, jackets. That's not a problem that's going to go away anytime soon. But it's, an issue that the UK and other European countries will need to wrestle with, how to get that local content. On the right here, again, not going to delve into this, but kind of looking at the sort of 2030 to 2050 global picture. So probably going from round about the 300 gigawatt mark by 2030 up to maybe 2,300 gigawatt. No surprise, China is expected to be the world leader. And again, on here, I've kind of shown, you can see there that the floating market, which is very, very small pre-2030, will be quite a sizable part of the mix come 2050. So one thing I did think about, looking at the sort of T-Shore members, and skills will be linked to this, but looking at the kind of 5 countries, it did occur to me, looking at each country, from a Belgian point of view, very much being an early adopter of wind, does have a limited seascape, so the long term, 8 gigawatts by 2040 is quite modest compared to some other countries. But where Belgium has been quite fortunate, they've got some very strong tier ones, very strong government support. The reason I mention this is kind of making that local content switch, having a higher level of supply indigenously, kind of matters if you have a strong tier one or a strong government network. So, Belgium's very fortunate in that respect. And again, from a port infrastructure point of view, a couple of ports which are very well good and ready to service the sector. Thinking about the Danish point of view, I kind of have them as, invented offshore wind. Haven't deployed too much, but have a really strong pipeline. You can see going forward, by 2050, some big aspirations. And again, Denmark is extremely strong in the developer front. You could argue the kings of offshore wind have been Ørsted, but a really strong tier one network, Vestas, Cadler, Semco. Again, it just makes local content and embedding skills a little bit easier if you have kind of higher up players which come from that country. And again, arguably probably got the most advanced offshore wind port hub in Esbjerg anywhere in the world. From a Netherlands point of view, again, has been an early adopter, very strong pipeline, and again, similar to Denmark, a really strong tier one landscape, and very advanced ports, so very well set for growth going forward. Norway, again, I think Norway's really strong strength is, has a fantastic oil and gas legacy and are really the kings of exporting that capability around the world. With a green mix already, not deployed too much, but again, some big aspirations, and again, really strong kind of developer community and a tier one landscape. So just making that, embedding the skills and embedding local content a little bit easier. Ireland, kind of similar to the UK, I guess, other than, no oil and gas legacy, very strong pipeline aspirations, I won't go into the consenting challenges, but we know we have them. A strong indigenous developer in ESB. but no leading tier ones that you see in some of the other countries, very similar to the UK. So this can be a challenge sometimes for kind of bringing local content, and again, some work to do on ports. So that's just a little bit of context. So looking at how the UK has evolved in terms of state leasing methods for ensuring skills agenda is embedded in the UK. So it's been a 22-year journey in the UK, 16.4 gigawatts installed. I think that makes us the second biggest country in the world. So that's really the deployment profile that's happened in the UK. So in the early years, I would say 1.8 gigawatts, 12 projects. Basically, they were supported by FIDers. And really, this was what I'd call a no condition requirement. So developers weren't sort of having to make any commitments on local content, on skills. So it was a kind of just get the market going period, I would say. Into this kind of intervening period up to 2019, 8 gigawatts deployed across 23 projects. Again, still in the FIDer world. But what I would say, kind of the government's trying to put a little bit more pressure on embedding skills, embedding local content, but again, kind of done in an unconsolidated manner. Where things kind of stepped up a notch is from 2020. So you can see there we've deployed around about 7 gigawatts across 10 projects, so project size getting much bigger. But we're now into what I'd call the CFD world. And really, the UK government was requiring, there was a sector deal published which kind of asked for, a certain amount of local content. Developers had to submit a supply chain plan, which had commitments around 4 criteria, the fourth of which being skills. So this is the first time that there was an actual, if you like, a gating process on making sure skills was on the agenda. And again, not going to go through it there in the essence of time, but the skills criteria, I would say, was pretty broad. But this is kind of the point from 2019, 2020 is when there was a definitive, commitment required of developers on skills. Interestingly, I thought there, when you actually look at the scoring criteria, not much between them, but of the 4 criteria, skills was the lowest, which is possibly a bit disappointing. But for reasons I'll explain, I'll come on to why that potentially is. So the sector deal 2019, as I talked about, it required a kind of top-down 60% UK content. Essentially it didn't work, and it was redacted in 2025. People who've heard me speak before will have seen this. This is kind of where I would map where the costs go on an offshore wind farm. But really the problem the UK was having, if you look across it there, is that local content stagnated. We just weren't getting, and would kind of maximise our very high levels of OPEX, very high levels of DevEx. But if you look at the kind of CapEx in 2020, and only 12% of this being bought in the UK. So to get to 60%, we needed to almost treble that. And the reality is, for a number of reasons, that just wasn't going to happen. I'll not go through the table there, but localization of the CapEx was going to take a monumental shift, and the UK supply chain is just not set up to do that. So I think an instrumental difference in 2024, the UK published an industrial growth strategy. So it's much more targeted to kind of where the UK wants to play. A clean industry bonus scheme has been launched this year for round 7 CFD. And there's significant investment funds, but rather than sort of across everything, it's targeted on these 5 areas. So the 5 areas you see there, that's where the UK is kind of prioritising to say, this is where we're going to invest and this is where we expect to kind of succeed. So again, going from a kind of broad brush sector deal top-down target, I think countries could learn from this, that a much more nuanced, targeted approach has been instrumental in the UK, a major difference. So within this IGP, skills is identified, is it almost a backbone issue? Again, I'll not go through the detail here, but it is a kind of overriding, talking to the fact that we know there are skill shortages. So much more rather than broad brush approach to skills is looking at how do we address the skill shortages we're going to have in the UK, and just some interesting things that I'll let you look at your leisure in terms of what we identified. From this IGP, OWIC, Offshore Wind Industry Council, have a people and skills plan. And again, I won't go through this detail here, but I'll let you read it at your leisure. But specifically looking at, what is the skills challenge? So kind of 4 themes and 4 priorities. And I think significantly, the training provision part was identified as a key part of this. And again, I won't have time to go through it here, but really kind of a concerted effort to kind of map the training partners that we have, what funding challenges do they have. It's really about, I think, the message I would give to you, which is what T-Shore is all about, is it's ensuring at a national level you don't have pockets of colleges doing their own thing. I think having a sort of national agenda, a standardisation, a consistency in the curriculum they develop is absolutely what's required. So the state measures for embedding skills, key takeaways. So this is almost what have the government done. So I think the UK started off with a top-down approach to skills. I think it's been fair to say it's been pretty light touch, non-prescriptive. And I think this is due in large parts to the fact that, the sector is delivering on skills. It's you folks as educational institutions are best placed to decide how to do the curriculum, how to do this, rather than governments getting involved. So I think that's largely why it's been a little bit leave the skills provision to it, not be prescriptive, whereas a lot of the innovation stuff, the local content stuff, the government's taking a much more active role. I think developers and tier 1 contractors are extremely willing and very capable of identifying what skills they need and to work with you folks as skills providers to deliver that. I think that's abundantly clear in the UK. Vocational skills providers have the best knowledge of the existing cross-industry curriculum and are best placed to map against the offshore wind needs. I don't think this needs governments really to interfere. Skills providers, you are much better at collaborating nationally. And again, from an innovation point of view, a local content point of view, that's not all ports. That's not always the case. But I think as training providers, you're set up to collaborate much better, and driving alignment to sort of win standards is kind of common practice. And I think despite some shortages in specific areas and the challenges of post-Brexit, which I won't go into, Scotland didn't vote for, by the way, but anyway, we'll move on. Skills isn't kind of at the top list of the challenges facing offshore wind at the moment. We've got local content issues, supply chain competitiveness, grid consenting, commodity price increase, anti-wind sentiment. Skills, I'm not saying it's not a priority, but it's kind of delivering what it needs to deliver in the UK. So just leaving them to it, essentially. So what have developers done? So I've kind of talked about the government part, the environment that the government's created in the UK. What are the developers kind of doing in terms of initiatives which are kind of driving skills? And I think, developers are acutely aware of the UK labour market. Been here for 22 years, kind of got a feel for the challenges in the labour market. And I think there's a realisation there's almost going to be a 4-fold increase needed from around about 7,000 FTEs to 27,000 by 2030. That's not something that just happens by magic. And developers are acutely aware, they need to have a much more flexible pool of cross-trained people. That was early, realised pretty early. Address short-term critical labour constraints by delivering initiatives that deliver against known longer-term skills gaps, and regional shortages. So kind of taking that much more mature approach, increasing the quality and level of apprenticeships, graduates and trainees within industry, by encouraging the supply chain to promote kind of through life career pathways. And I'll come back to a couple of examples of that later on. Improve the diversity and inclusiveness of the sector. Offshore wind is a really good sector for kind of driving gender equality, etc. A real exemplar in that market. So I think developers have really got on board with that. I think offshore wind has been a really good mechanism as well for promoting STEM. The kind of traditional STEM, sometimes a challenge to get kids interested in that. So I think offshore wind really, and developers have really taken that on board at a national and regional level and really trying to promote STEM subjects are cool again. So I think really done good things in that. And proactively promoting the sector as a career option of longevity and choice, and global mobility. I think that's another thing developers have really done well in showing. I won't go through some of the key challenges, but these are the key challenges that the UK market, you might find this in your own markets, are kind of facing. As a continued increase in competition for talent. The supply of talent is less than the future demand. So what are we going to do about it? The changing population demographics. The UK, it's like a lot of your countries, the population is aging, and in order to attract people, we need to mirror these changes across the communities, and again adapting to an uncertain future. So this is kind of what the developers have wrestled with and recognised in the UK. So analysis done in the UK, and again, what might be similar in your particular markets or might be different, but this is some of the kind of competencies that the UK has kind of looked at to say, where are we going to have some shortages in kind of key functional areas, and what sort of competencies do we need to focus on? There are a number of long-term availability concerns in the UK, even though we've been doing this for 20 odd years. So electrical, technical and engineering, particularly around the substations, high voltage electricals and cables, is identified as a shortage. Supply chain management, the ability, contracting and offshore wind is very different from a lot of industries. So having people with the skills to deal with these sort of large packages is identified as a shortage. High level of digitization, again, folks in Ireland will know this very well, but offshore wind is in the future going to much more into data analytics, AI, digital engineering, SCADA, machine learning. So again, identifying that early, that we need to focus on that has been instrumental in the UK. Computer literacy, across a lot of industries, but again, specifically for offshore wind, and heavy engineering. The move to offshore wind, it's much more about serial manufacture, complex fabrication, really high-end welding. So that has been, welding's been a real key shortage we've had in the UK. But again, this is something that the developers with industry are kind of mapping out, where are the shortages. So some of the things I'm just going to very quickly run through. These are sort of some initiatives that developers are doing to embed the skills. So apprenticeship, there's 10 measures here. Again, a lot of developers doing a lot of good things, but I've just pulled some kind of novel approaches by some of the developers here, just to give you an example. So in terms of apprenticeships, generally all developers in the UK will have some kind of program on this. Eon, who developed, I think, London Array, some of the early projects, they come up with a really neat kind of what I'd call a cradle to grave approach to apprenticeships, and it's really about showing a clear pathway from school education, even primary school, into professional accreditation into the sector. So it's this idea of not just focusing on the kind of college level, on the kind of technician awareness. It needs to go much earlier, back into secondary schools and really back into primary schools. Again, I'm not going to focus on this, but just giving you a really neat way to kind of take this back back to primary education through secondary, and just showing this pathway into a professional registration. I think that's one of the key learnings in the UK is showing that journey and starting early with school pupils. So apprenticeships is definitely one way of embedding skills in the UK. A second way, and I alluded to it earlier, was a kind of STEM focus. So, looking at early education support initiatives. Again, all developers, I would say, in the UK generally take this approach, but RWE on their Sophia project, they've got a really cool, what they're calling the Champions of Wind concept, where, in the primary school area, working with the local authority, they actually provide teaching resource for around 20 primary schools, and they've developed a suite of online teacher workshop material, which is shared through websites, but really empowers teachers to kind of design how they can sort of implement offshore wind into primary school classes. Again, on the secondary school level, this whole journey thing, the Champions of Wind really focuses on supporting secondary teachers develop their own, subject-specific curriculum material. 5 teachers in the region have been identified as champions. And this is targeted at kids from about 12 to 18. But really, allowing GCSE level students, to actually spend a week carrying out projects, participating in meetings. And I think the key thing that I liked about what RWE are doing, they get real-time feedback from the RWE team. So almost this idea of letting the pupils be part of a developer project team in a real-life situation. A third area in sort of embedding skills has been bursaries and direct sponsorship. So developers, Ocean Winds, for example, are through their Supporting Young Learners scheme, providing students with kind of throughout their studies at university, financially providing them in areas close to the wind farm. SSE, the Dogger Bank, for those who don't know, probably the biggest project in the world of the northeast of England. Excuse me, they've got a really good bursary scheme to help young people in low-income families go after engineering-related degrees, and again, taking 20 students a year, putting them through that. So bursaries, direct sponsorship, developers are very good at doing that kind of thing. The fourth area is kind of what I'd call a sort of local skills champion concept. So a good example of that is Vattenfall with their Norfolk and Boreas projects. So again, they've employed a local liaison and skills champion. So working with 14 schools, they've developed a 3D virtual reality initiative. Working with a local web company, the University in Norfolk. Employing dedicated staff really has been transformational in terms of kind of getting kids interested, getting them engaged, and looking at kind of key specialism areas within offshore wind. Fifth area, supporting youth charities. Ørsted have done a lot for that round about the Grimsby area. So again, this idea of peer-to-peer learning and investing, embedding the skills early, attracting people to the sector has been really important. Internships, again, a lot of you folks will probably be doing this now, but a lot of internship programs in the UK. SSE's Dogger Bank Career Ready programme as one example I'll give you, where they have a 4-week initiative working with local students where they get internship opportunities. Across the first 5 years, they've taken on 57 people, and a number of these students have gone on to education within the sector and ultimately employment at their SSE. So the internship model definitely works. The seventh area, kind of sponsoring of societal visitor attractions. An example there with Ørsted. Again, just this kind of focusing on the STEM type projects and really just getting kids interactive things just to kind of get them engaged in the types of competencies that offshore wind needs going forward. Skills accelerators, there's various examples in the UK. Probably one of the best one is the ETZ, the Energy Transition Zone in Aberdeen. So I urge people to have a look at that. So that's initiated by the Wood Group and really sort of recognising Aberdeen's oil and gas capabilities. They've established an advanced manufacturing skills hub there, and a supply chain incubation hub. So really this Northeast Skills Accelerator concept is this one-stop shop is a really cool concept. I'd urge you to have a look at it, and really helping people develop their skills and transition it into offshore wind. It focuses on known gaps within the sector, focuses on apprenticeships, internships, sponsorships, in these STEM workshops. So much so, a couple of developers have joined the programme, and they're specifically looking at floating wind, and will run it through the ETZ. So, floating wind is very new and very different to fixed wind in a number of areas. So again, working through a skills accelerator like the ETZ, looking at kind of new problems around dynamic cables, moorings, anchoring. These kind of skills accelerators are really quite cool. The ninth one, promoting diversity. I alluded to that before. So a lot of developers are looking at this. Vattenfall, I'll not go through the example here, but really taking this seriously. And now 57% of their senior leadership team roles are held by women, which I think is a sterling effort. But again, the diversity angle developers are very good at doing. And last one I identified is the fisheries, the kind of co-efficiency challenge. So again, most countries out there will have challenges with the kind of offshore wind fisheries cohabitation. But again, developers have very proactively looked at that challenge. And actually, there's a body of evidence in the UK now looking at where fishermen can actually, work on projects, whether it's doing guarding roles, bird and mammal watching, etc. But the likes of Equinor, developers really doing a lot of stuff to look at how the skills are transferable from fishing into offshore wind. So that's kind of what developers have done. The last part I'll go through, which will take me sort of the last sort of 8 to 10 minutes, is really what the skills providers have done to meet the evolving needs of the sector. So I'm kind of going to go through a tiered approach, and this is where I'm going to take a Scottish example. So if we take kind of level 0 as the Scottish government, so very recently, this month actually, the Scottish government's kind of provided a strategy framework, if you like, the offshore wind priorities and action plan. So it's really a direction for the industry to get behind. So it's just been published, and really taking a hands-on approach to assuring we have the skills available nationally. They have a short life working group, and it's identified key shortages. So again, if you've not already done so, I would urge these markets is to look at where are the kind of key shortages, where are the pinch points. And again, I'll not have time to go through all of these, but these are the kind of key shortage areas identified in Scotland in terms of skills gaps. And there's then 12 improvement measures, which are, this isn't a kind of 5-year plan. This is something that's going to be delivered next year and the year after, but really working across the sector with 12 priority initiatives about actually what we're going to do, what we're going to fund. Again, at your leisure, please have a look at that. But again, kind of covering a lot of interesting concepts, oil and gas, for example, how we kind of bring these people over, how to collaborate, how to share. But again, have a look at that document. It's a really good kind of guiding strategy, if you like, of the government setting the tone of directionally where we want to go with skills in Scotland. Kind of come in a level down, which are called level 1. So we have SOWEC, Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council. Now that's a kind of government stroke industry, similar to OWIC. But this is the delivery body for offshore wind, but they have taken on skills. So that's kind of how SOWEC works. And you can see there, skills is at the top table. And essentially how that's run is the Energy Skills Partnership. They run that for on behalf of SOWEC. So again, that's kind of down from the government strategy. This is the delivery body, and they have a skills action plan. So the one level down from that is the Energy Skills Partnership, I've said, so kind of level 2. So really, I'd urge you to have a look at their website, what they're doing. So they're responsible for embedding STEM in vocational colleges and ensuring that all, and I mean all skills providers, so all technical colleges in Scotland work through ESP. And this basically ensures that there's a consistent curriculum developed across all colleges, which is really targeted to what the offshore wind sector needs. So there's a map there of all Scotland's vocational colleges. And as I say, they all work through Energy Skills Partnerships. This is one thing I would urge you to look at that, Scotland does well, is not having kind of pockets of colleges and universities doing their own thing. Everything kind of feeds under ESP, and that's kind of mapped there. Again, this is some of the initiatives that they're doing in terms of developing the teachers, engaging with communities, and really reaching out to kind of SMEs out there to ensure that they have access to skills, but are also thinking about it for going forward. And again, some really neat programs that they've developed online in terms of how to get into the sector, how to start. So ESP kind of, really, really good how Scotland have done it. The last thing I'll show is almost 3. So what I'm kind of trying to show you here is there very much is a kind of 4 level, how everything kind of feeds in. So this is taking you down to an example of Fraserburgh, a small fishing town in the northeast of Scotland. And the harbour was selected by Ocean Winds to host the O&M Centre for the Moray East project. So that's the O&M Centre in the harbour. That's it showing there. So really from this, the town recognised that it needed to establish an integrated approach to skills. And one of the biggest challenges they have, that you folks maybe have in your kind of harbour communities, is young people weren't staying, they were leaving the town. So they realised, how do we, this gift we've been giving of getting the O&M Centre, how do we use that as a way to get our young people staying in the town and interested in offshore wind? So they came up with a kind of whole town strategy on an education initiative. And really this involved the port, the local college, Fraserburgh College, and the local primary and secondary schools, Fraserburgh Academy. They worked together to develop a through life skills pipeline initiative. And this strategy established a joined up pathway. It's back to what I talked about before, going right back to the primary school age and showing kids through secondary school and into college a kind of pathway, rather than just simply focusing on sort of technician training, if you like. So they have numerous primary school learning initiatives, harbour visits, Imagine Your Future class, and climate change education. So really found a lot of success and a lot of engagement from the kids at a very young age. They've also invested in a dedicated learning centre, and what they actually do, they allow secondary school students time out of their classes. You can see some of the examples there of some of the learning opportunities they have. So it's a really good way for transitioning the pupils that are maybe sort of 15, 16 into the kind of further education college and environment. If you look at the third one down there, a really cool initiative they've done is Girls in Energy. So again, finding that girls are just not thinking there's a role for them in offshore wind. So very much at a kind of secondary school level, showing teenage girls that this absolutely is a career choice for you. And again, some of the kind of pathway education that they do there. And this is all linked to the college, which, as I say, works under ESP. So really what I wanted to show you there is this linked approach that Scotland does very well, from the government down through a delivery body, SOWEC, down through ESP, who are kind of working for the vocational colleges, down to individual towns taking a kind of skills agenda approach. So my last slide, and I'm pretty much bang on time, was, I was looking at the T-Shore priorities, some of the focuses you have there, some of the kind of looking across the training you're looking to do there. I think, that perfectly fits into a kind of the Scottish integrated skills approach, and I would urge you to, keep up the good work of what you're doing. So my details are there, and now for the last 15 minutes, happy to stop sharing and throw open to the room in terms of any questions people may have. Bang on time.
Great, Alan.
Who would have thought it? Bang on time.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A section, but there's a question here in the chat from Gareth Rentier from the Netherlands. Hello, Gareth. He's saying, in Scotland, the government is setting the tone for where it wants to go with skills development for offshore wind, kind of coordinating the labour market. But in Westminster, but is Westminster doing something similar, or does Westminster have an arm's length policy between government sector and employees? So do you think the way businesses, government and employees in Scotland are organised regarding offshore wind skills could be replicated in neighbouring countries?
Yeah, it's a better watch, because this is getting recorded and into this political sensitivity around about Westminster and Holyrood. So yeah, I'll better watch what I'm saying here. But yeah, the UK is a bit strange that, you know, the CFD process is run in Westminster, you know, so the Scottish government kind of has no influence over that, whereas skills is a kind of devolved matter for Scotland. So I think probably the politest way I could say this is, yeah, but because the Scottish government have that in their power, you know, they don't have any say over who gets a CFD and which projects and which developers. So you could argue it's maybe a bit easier for the Scottish government to spend a bit more time on skills. They're not having to worry about auctions and whatever. So I'm being kind to the Scottish government here, but no, I think because it is in their power, they do spend a much greater time doing this. That's not to say it isn't done in Westminster. SOWEC in Scotland is very similar to OWEC in England, but what I would say is in my experience, the Scottish example, as you correctly say, Gareth, is a little bit more hands-on, I would say, in Scotland. You know, the government definitely kind of works with industry, works with the ESP, with the colleges, and is taking a bit more of a hands-on approach. And to answer your question, it's kind of why I showed the Scottish example. I think the Scottish example is absolutely replicable. You know, you know, you could copy that in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Ireland, you know, in the member companies. So it's kind of why I showed Scotland that it is what's possible, taking this kind of tiered approach. And what I really like about the skills is being able to sit in Fraserburgh Harbour, a tiny fishing harbour, and kind of having a skills agenda which feeds up through the 4 levels directly to the government policy. That's really what I wanted to show everybody, that, you know, the skills, I think what we've learned in the UK or in Scotland is it really only works if there's a coordinated method right from the government right down to primary schools level in a small fishing port. That's really what I wanted to show today, that having this journey approach, this starting early, and to making sure you identify your skills gaps, is why I think the Scottish example is kind of best in class. I don't want to say, you know, I'm not saying this doesn't go on in England, but from what I see in Scotland, it just seems to work, and I hope you folks see this today, that it makes sense.
And so, can I just ask about the Fraserburgh community? So that was selected, I presume, because it's in the East Coast, near where a lot of the development was taking place. And did you say Ocean Winds sponsored
Yes.
the development of the centre? Or was it subsidized by government, or was it all the developer?
Yeah, so like small communities in each of your countries, you know, Fraserburgh were, I'm saying but they were just a small fishing port. Kind of never thought they would land it, but bid into Ocean Winds to be the O&M centre, were successful in doing it, and kind of, you know, took this as an opportunity to say, do you know what, we could just take some fees in the port from having the vessels coming in, have the centre. But do you know what? They saw it as an opportunity to do something much bigger, if that makes sense. The fact that they had a vocational college there, and actually the schools were really up for it, they kind of took the opportunity to say, do you know what? Let's do something different. Let's just not be an O&M port. Let's you know, use this as a, again, if I'm being cynical, you know, the one thing, developers do have money. Developers will spend in local communities. So I think Fraserburgh saw this as an opportunity to take the money from Ocean Winds and actually do something a bit different from it. You know, go for this kind of through life education, put programs on for the primary school, get the kids down. They do things like naming the vessel competitions, but, you know, just little silly things, but just having this. So to answer your question, you know, I'm not saying the Learning Centre, you know, Ocean Winds necessarily funded the whole thing, but money through the Community Benefit Fund will have paid part of it. Fraserburgh College will have paid part of it, but yeah, government are supporting initiatives. And, you know, and I think it's a much easier sell to a government to put their hand in their pocket for someone like Fraserburgh that are doing a holistic town approach, not just give us some money to put 5G in the port or to upgrade our port infrastructure. But, you know, we're going to have a learning centre. We're going to bring primary school kids. We're going to get into secondary school kids much earlier, get them into the training centre, get them kind of touching bits from an offshore wind farm. So to answer your question, the funding was multi-funded, but I would generally say governments are, certainly in the UK case, the Scottish Government case, they'll much more readily put their hand in their pocket for something that Fraserburgh have done than give us money to invest in port infrastructure. It's a much easier sell.
So there was obviously a proactive community in Fraserburgh that
Absolutely
saw the opportunity and went for it. That's great.
Well, listen, what the town saw, and again, the folks on the call that are from a fishing community background, what the fishermen are seeing is their kids aren't interested in wanting to do fishing and follow dad onto the boats. You know, Fraserburgh's big challenge is Aberdeen is the big smoke, you know, about an hour away. And they're basically seeing everybody kind of leaving Fraserburgh and moving to the big lights of Aberdeen. So they're actually seeing a bit of a drain in the town, and saw offshore wind as a mechanism for, you know, let's give kids a reason to want to stay in Fraserburgh, to want to work in the port. Okay, maybe don't want to, you know, fishing's a hard game, but there is another way that people can stay, you know, live in Fraserburgh, raise families in Fraserburgh, and offshore wind is that, you know, that's something I've often heard in Fraserburgh they talk about, you know, from this little tiny backwater, you're getting into offshore wind is your access to the world. You know, you could be a technician on Moray East and your next job could be in South Korea or Japan or United States, or, you know, so they've very much seen it as the sell to the kids as, you know, that this is your window to the world. You know, getting involved at a Fraserburgh level, but, you know, you become a technician on Moray West or Moray East, you could very well be, you know, working somewhere international. So I think I just want to use it as an example of, if you take a kind of whole town approach to the opportunity you have with a sector like offshore wind, you know, you can really do some cool stuff from a skills point of view.
Yeah, it's definitely become a globalized market or globalized industry. There's another question here from Juanita Blue. Hi, Juanita. Is it envisioned that focus on promotion of STEM to young people will improve interest in careers in the sector, or will it just send talent down the usual STEM channels, engineering, technology, etc.? Encouraging women into the sector is important, but offshore wind technician skills, climbing turbines, for example, is not for all women or men, I suppose. Are there other skills roles in offshore wind that are promoted that might not require such bravery?
Yeah, so I think kind of I'll take sort of three parts to that. You know, so the STEM thing, you know, yes, I would. I can see maybe your skepticism about, you know, making STEM cool again, but do you know what? I think offshore wind has seen that as has kind of taken on that baton, has taken on that mantle to say, do you know what? You know, the STEM subjects are cool. They can be cool. Look at the kind of industry you could come. So yeah, it remains to be seen whether sort of pushing kids towards STEM will work. But I think offshore wind has taken that mantle on. So I think over the coming years, we'll see if it's succeeded with that. I think on the women question, you've talked about, absolutely valid. I think one of the projects I work on, NNG, Nertnaguia, off the east coast of Scotland, they've got their first woman technician. So it is, and they're very proud of her. But I take your point, you know, it's not for everybody, women doing that. But I think the point with this is it's at least showing that it absolutely is possible, and it's not technicians is not a job for men. It's a job for anybody that wants to be a technician. So I think offshore wind has done a really neat job of that. But to answer your point on that, absolutely, there are so many other roles that don't involve climbing up turbines. It's not for everybody. Again, happy if anybody wants to contact me, I can kind of share some analysis that has been done. But the amount of jobs in offshore wind, the analysis that have been published on the variety of jobs that don't involve climbing turbines is actually really neat. And I forgot the last part of the question was around about skilled labour.
Are there other skills roles that offshore wind in offshore wind that are promoted?
Exactly that, yeah. Doesn't require even necessarily going offshore. One area I talked about, offshore wind. We're kind of at the vanguard of offshore wind is going to be going into a lot of really cool remoteless AI type space, rather than sending technicians out on boats to check something, condition monitoring software. So, there's even a whole raft of competencies and jobs required in that space. We haven't really touched upon that yet in offshore wind, but in the next 10 to 20 years, this remoteless monitoring, this remoteless intervention is going to become a big thing. So there's even a whole raft of roles and competencies in that. The offshore wind will offer some really exciting career opportunities for folks.
Absolutely, it's watch this space. Yeah. Juanita comes back to say STEM is cool, but she wonders, is offshore wind diluted under the STEM umbrella?
Is offshore wind diluted under the STEM? I think how I'd kind of answer that is, and I think it's almost back to the primary. Okay, this may be a bit contentious, but there's a lot of things now. Not that I'm decrying media study, but there's a lot of choices that kids have that I think dilutes the attractiveness of the STEM subjects. But I think what offshore wind is identified is that offshore wind offers a really cool career, I think. But to get into that, you need the basic. I'm not saying you can't have media studies degree and get into the offshore wind, but focus on the STEM subjects. That's the fundamentals of getting into a career like offshore wind. So has it diluted in offshore wind? Quite possibly, but as I said before, I just think offshore wind has taken on that mantle to say, do you know what? STEM is cool. It's the foundation. It's the building blocks of what we need in our sector. So I think getting kids interested in that early is the sector has taken on that mantle. Will it dilute? Is it going to be effective? Let's wait and see. But I think it'll work.
Super.
Right.
I think it's come to 12 o'clock, so I think we'll wrap up there. That was really interesting, Alan. I don't think there's any more questions.
So yeah, listen, as I say, the slides, I'll make them available. I've put my details on there. More than happy to speak to anybody on here to kind of dig into any part. There's a lot of analysis. There's pages of stuff I could have put into here about the UK example, but please get in touch with me and I'll put you in touch with some of the stuff we've done in the UK. And yeah, listen, best of luck.
I think there was a hand up there from Gareth, and Mark Corcoran had a comment as well, but yeah, we're running out of time. I don't know if Gareth can get his microphone on to speak, but Mark Corcoran just said 100% coordination and collaboration is the way forward. Public and private sector using their individual strengths for the national good, everybody playing to their strength.
Yeah. That's
correct, Mark.
So yeah, as I say, get in touch, any queries or questions you have. But yeah, I think for me, best of luck. I think the UK can, we've had bumps on the road in the UK, but it is, I'm biased, but it's a fantastic sector. It holds so much promise. And stick with it, go for it. And yeah, learn from the mistakes the Brits have made and do it right out there in Europe.
I think we've an awful lot to learn from the Scottish experience. Thanks a million for that, Alan.
Thanks everyone coming by. Have a good day now.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks a million. Take care.